So I'll just kick off by telling that everyone that the next Ask Me Anything session is with Seth Gilbert and Keren Censor-Hillel, two up-and-coming leaders of the research community, and they are going to be respectively the program committee chairs for DISC and PODCI. And I thought it will be interesting to hear what they have to say to us and to each other in some sense. There won't be a moderator. I'll trust them to moderate each other and to start with the questions on Zulip or whatever they want to do. So I'll hand off to both of you. So go ahead.
So thanks, Hagi.
Keren, how you doing?
Hi, Seth. How are you?
Doing okay.
Yep. Okay. Great.
So,
what should we start with?
So the first question on Zulip is by Hagit. Hagit, do you want to tell us your question live and
yeah,
and let Keren respond since
yeah, I ask you, what do you wish to see as the most important thing you would like to see done differently or happen differently in your respective conferences? So make a wish.
And PODCI comes first, so I'll let Keren answer first here.
Okay, great. I mean, for me, PODCI DISC is the same community, so I don't know if I would have any different, separate answers if I was asked about DISC or PODCI. But so I think there are two main things that I would really like to see, and I'm actually not entirely sure how to achieve them. So anyone who wants to give feedback is more than welcome later on. One is the quality of reviews. I think that sometimes it improves, but I think there's a lot of more work to be done there. And maybe we should prepare some very short document that maybe says what we want to see in reviews. So a review is typically addressed both to the PC and to the authors, and both look for different things in the reviews. And I would really like to see better reviews in terms of thorough reading and, saying exactly what we like in the paper, what needs improvement, and so on. That's one aspect. The other aspect is even bigger. I think we should, as a community, make PODCI DISC more relevant. I think that I would like to see, I don't know if this happens a lot, and maybe the more senior people can tell me, but I would like to see people from the PODCI DISC community get invited to give keynote talks at the same conferences that we invite people from these communities to give keynote talks at PODCI DISC. This would, for me, mean that we reached a point where what we do is more relevant. This is just marking an indication, not how to reach that goal, but I think this is our biggest goal as a community. Seth.
Yeah, no, I think that last point you're making actually gets to a question Edith was asking later, in some sense, of how do we balance these issues of what we want to do, for ourselves that we're interested in, as well as being relevant to the outside world. And I think it's hard. I think we've been talking about this at PODCI DISC for ever since I've been involved in this conference. We've been talking about this question of how do we get more systems people involved in our conference? How do we get our community more involved with other conferences and so on? And it seems to be a difficult issue. I mean, I've seen lots of comments by PC chairs in the past saying, yes, we want to accept more good systems papers at PODCI and DISC, and it seems to be very hard to do because you need them people to submit those good papers, because we don't have the right reviewers, because I don't know, there seem to be lots of issues here.
I think it's fine. I think it's fine to do the theory. Just make sure that we're doing sort of the right theory, right? So we don't have to be the ones that build systems.
Well, and honestly, I mean, a lot of what I do is certainly theory, and I have no objection to theory for theory's sake to some extent, as long as we're honest about what we're doing. What bothers me more is when, say, I write a paper that says, I am going to solve this very practical problem, X, Y, and Z, that is a huge issue in the real world. This is our motivation. We really care about this practical problem. Now let me assume a totally abstract theoretical model and derive some lower bounds for it. Yeah, and again, I've done this. I'm in glass houses and throwing stones or whatever the phrase is, but that's what bothers me more than even than sort of the theory aspects of things. I think that's part of what sets us up for criticism by the outside world. Systems people read those papers. They say, you promised you were going to solve this practical problem. I don't see your solution here look practical at all. Anyways.
Yeah, I think it also relates to, I think this might also relate to a discussion on Zulip, which I admittedly do not read everything because there's a really large volume of messages, but about rankings and you know, acceptance rates. I think the point is not to look, I mean, the numbers will be looked at from outside of our community because that's how people evaluate fields that they're less familiar with. That's what I do when I need to evaluate. Not the only thing, but it's a tool and it's an important tool. And I think what we need to do is do science that interests other scientists, and that will cause the better measures for us as a community.
Yeah, no, I both hate all the ranking stuff and find it frustrating and also hard to ignore because it seems like it matters. Certainly out here where I am, my department pays attention to these rankings. I know a lot of other people's departments pay attention to these rankings. The rankings are all wrong, but the last they seem to matter. But yeah, I think you're right that the right thing to do is to focus on doing good science and assume the rankings will follow.
What else would you like to see for DISC, for PODC DISC?
Yeah, so I guess I mean, there are all these big changes that we've been talking about on the last night at the meeting on models and on Zulip and so on. I think most of that's not going to change by next year's DISC is my assumption. So I've been thinking about the smaller types of changes that we can make in a given year. So what changes can we make to the program to make it more interesting, to better use the time we have together? Okay, let's take a couple steps back. The big change I'd like to see next year at DISC is we're all sitting in the same room together rather than doing this over the internet. But alas, I'm maybe a pessimist on that one. But either way, what I've been thinking about is what can we do to better use the time that we do have together. You know, is it better for us to have longer talks, shorter talks, more invited talks? Should we invite people from systems areas to give talks about the most relevant distributed systems papers that have happened in the last year? I don't know. It's something I've been thinking about, and I don't have a good answer yet. Come to DISC next year and see what we end up doing. But I'd certainly love to hear any ideas people have. What's this? Christoph is saying, I'm not sure. Oh,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry. No, we promised to interrupt each other. So yeah, go ahead.
When you add latency into it, it gets even more interesting.
Yeah, and I wasn't even supposed to disclose this pact we have. Yeah, go ahead.
So Christoph's asking, I'm not sure it's easy to get practitioners to come over, look around in our work and invite us for keynotes. How do we go over to the mathematicians and ask them to solve our problems? Do you think this is a simplistic view? If so, how can we get them more interested? I don't know. How do we get them interested in our work? Hopefully we do things that interest them, things that are relevant to them, things that help solve their problems. I doubt they're going to be interested just because we've solved some abstract problem that they don't care at all about, unfortunately, but that's probably the reality of it. I don't know. What do you think? Any response to Christoph's comment here?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, we have to be proactive and search for what we can help with. They're not just going to come to us for, you know, oh, I can't solve this. Maybe you guys can. I mean, they need first sort of a proof of concept that, you know, that we have some expertise that they can use. So,
I think last year when the same topic came up, Hagit had made the point that most of the ways these things happen are via collaborations that we have with other people. As in, we go out, we talk to other people, we work with them, and thus we create bridges across communities. If I recall correctly, this was Hagit's point last time we had this conversation, which I think is a good one.
Is it easy to do? So I don't know, you mentioned, maybe you can tell about this, you had a paper with Cal Newport last year that was sort of bio-related. Is it easy to, maybe you want to explain what this was? And the question is, this is my question, is it easy to reach out to these communities and interest them in?
Yeah, no, not at all. So this was, I think Keren's referring to this paper we had with some biologists up in Massachusetts on bioelectrics, and they have this idea that bioelectric fields are what leads to regeneration of limbs in certain weird types of animals. They have these very complicated differential equation simulators to understand them. Cal somehow ended up in touch with these people. This was really Cal who made the connection here, not me. I was just along for the ride here in some sense. But Cal somehow did a great job of finding these people and meeting up with them, figuring out what they were doing, and which led to this question of, well, can we use distributed computing ideas to understand what's happening better than these complicated differential equations? But I think it was hard because we really did speak very different languages when talking about what was going on. We had different views, even simple things about talking about randomness. We meant very different things by randomness than they did. From their perspective, the world was kind of deterministic, except deterministic in a way that looked kind of random because you don't know the initial conditions all that much. But from their perspective, all the randomness was really just sort of initial conditions. This idea of you might flip a coin halfway through the protocol, that seemed very strange. Like, well, why would you do that? The world just evolves the way it does. You run your differential equations and you get somewhere. And so even simple terms like that were hard. And this was talking to a group of people who were very interested in computational issues, as in this biology group was actually headed by someone who was himself very interested in the questions of computational models and computational theory and whether there was any interesting connection here. And even then it was hard. So yeah, no, I don't know.
So this is a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think so, yeah.
So maybe Edith wants to ask her questions from Zulip. Is Edith here? I don't.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi. So I asked basically 3 questions with a lot of sub-questions, So the first question is, I guess both of you guys started your careers doing red research and switched to being mostly blue. And question is, why do you do that? Is it easier to get results? Is it easier to get results published, or is it just more fun? That was the first question. And then maybe I'll ask the next one after you answer this one.
Seth, have you turned from red to blue, and why?
I will reject the premise of that question. I don't think I have turned from red to blue. In the sense that I think I still a large part of what I'm interested in are issues of reliability and fault tolerance, which I think of as core red team things like dynamic networks and so on. I'm still very interested in synchronization issues and how do we deal with changing latencies and so on. And a lot of stuff I work on, I'm not sure how it even is classified in the red-blue dichotomy. Like backoff protocols, is that red or blue? I don't know. Or using multi-arm bandit protocols for network selection. Again, red or blue, I don't know. So first, I don't think I've switched from red to blue. I think both sides do interesting things. I think the question the underlying question here, though, is sort of this observation our community does a lot of of blue style work these days, a lot of graph algorithms and so on. And why is that happening? Why are we, why has there been such this shift to working on graph algorithms? And there really have been some wonderful graph algorithms results over the last 5, 6, 7 years. So I think part of it is there have been these beautiful results that people have come up with. I don't know. What do you think?
So I've turned from red to blue. I think that for me, that would be a fair assessment. It's a little bit of your fault, Edith. because because part of this interest started with this paper I was reading and presenting in a class you gave that I took. So that was the start of like my first blue papers. I can remind you of it later. But I don't know how this happened. It wasn't like a planned decision. I think when I came to MIT for my postdoc, I mean, the people I worked there with in Nancy's group, students in the theory group, they were more interested in these related things. So I think it sort of happened. I do agree with one premise that you wrote, which is that it seems that blue papers are easier to get accepted. And I think this is something that I would really like to look into for the upcoming PodC and see why this is happening. I'm sure recent PodC discs have been doing this. If we can try to avoid it. So if we are talking, sorry, I'm now sort of drifting from your initial questions, but if we are,
I think you're moving to my next question.
Yeah,
I can ask it and then let you answer.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So the next question is I guess is a concern, but there's a question: what do we do about it? But it's not just an impression that I have that graph algorithms are easier to get accepted. We get the statistics at PodC this year, 50%, and out of a huge sample, 60 submissions, right? And at DISC, 40%, even, and so I think on this side, people at the business meeting were complaining that people outside the community are saying PodC shouldn't be a star and looking down at our conferences. But if you just ask yourself, if you take a random sample of these 60 papers that were submitted to PodC and 50% of them were accepted, and you would submit this random sample to any top theory conference, SODA, Fox, Talk, whatever, what percentage of them would be accepted? Do you think 50%? I think more like 15 maybe. So that's going to give our community a bad name, okay? I mean, you can't have it both ways, both have your papers easily accepted and have the prestige of a conference that doesn't accept papers easily. And so that's that side. And then the other side, I don't think that the question is about being practical or not being practical. It's just that when we deal with synchronization things, modeling is always a very important aspect of things. You're never going to capture reality exactly. And if we're going to criticize each other's models all the time and say why they're not good, we're not going to do any impactful research. And I guess I'm talking too much. I guess I should let you guys talk.
So I don't know what specific question to extract from this, but let me maybe say how I see things, and then Seth, unless he interrupts me, which he promised to do, will say what he thinks. So I perfectly agree. I think that it's not good even for the blue papers that the acceptance rate is that large. By the way, this entire discussion about red and blue is totally, I think Seth hinted at this. There are lots of other colors that are neither, and they're a significant, significant components of PodC and DISC, even if they're relatively smaller than just one of these red or blue parts. But this was just a side note. I agree that a 50% for distributed graph algorithms doesn't make sense. I think that I don't know, I just agree with what you say. I think that in some sub-communities of PodC DISC, the models are questioned too much, and in others, they're not questioned at all. This relates to something that Morris said yesterday, like if two people just improve each other's papers, maybe it's 3 or 4 groups of researchers, and then the motivation for the paper is that, well, I'm improving the state of the art for something. And this is natural. It's a natural thing to do, and it's okay to some extent, but it doesn't mean that we should forget what the first paper in this area? What was the motivation for that to begin with? And I do this also, right? So I'm a blue person, and I also do these things, and this is something that I've been personally, not as a future PC chair, but just as a member of this community, have been thinking a lot about lately. I'm not happy with this. I don't know how to change and sort of balance these things.
Sorry, maybe I have a question. What do red and blue papers mean? I don't know.
Seth, what do red and blue papers mean?
Sorry.
How convenient.
Yeah, sorry. So yes, this is inside baseball terminology, I guess. So some odd 10 years ago, Pierre Fregnault suggested that there was a divide in the community between people who are more interested in sort of graph theory and information and structural issues on one hand, I'll characterize it as, versus people on the other side who are more interested in fault tolerance and synchronization and shared memory and so on. Is that a reasonable characterization?
Yep. Very nice.
How many?
Thank you.
How many shared memory papers? What would be the percentage of those in accepted to stock?
But why, I mean, what would the answer to this question imply to you? I mean, I think
the same thing that they answer to Edith's question.
No, but
how many of the graph algorithms would be accepted there?
I don't know if it's the same thing. Okay, so I'm failing to monitor the chat. There's too many words there, but
she asked you
no, but okay.
directly,
So
right?
I mean, I think that Podsy disk acceptance rate are not the same. I mean, Fox, Stock, whatever, they're not distributed computing venues, so their interest is different. When they see a paper, they want something that would interest not only a distributed computing person, regardless. I mean, they're looking for something else. Many times it's something that, some mathematical tool, maybe it applies to another theory field. While in distributed computing, we might be interested in things that maybe don't apply to other theory fields. Maybe they apply to systems areas, or could be connected, or could have impact. I mean, that would be the goal. So I think the answer to this question is somewhat orthogonal to what happens in Podsy disk. That's my opinion.
So I think it seems a good answer to what Edith asks.
No, because shared memory papers are accepted at Podsy at the lower rate than they're accepted to conferences like PPOP, which are top tier, and graph algorithms are accepted to Podsy at 50%. Shared memory papers are accepted at like 5%. That's the problem.
So Seth, how would you address this for this?
I mean, I think trying to maintain a good balance in the program is important, and almost every PC chair cares about this, right? Trying to put together a program with a good balance of papers that will interest large segments of the community that's going to attend the conference. And so I think the point you are making that our goal isn't necessarily to please a stock Fox audience. I think that's certainly not going to be our focus next year, is trying to put together a program that will please the stock Fox audience. But I do think we should aim for some balance. On the other hand, I think you also have to live with the papers you see in front of you, and there's a challenge too. I certainly think part of why we've seen this shift to lots of graph algorithm papers is that over the last several years, a lot of really wonderful results have come out of the people working on this. A lot of leading members of our community have been working on this, producing wonderful results that have been winning best paper awards at Podsy and Disk, and papers that have been getting into Stock and Fox and so on. And so it has been a very, successful and productive area of research with lots of beautiful results. That doesn't mean it should end up being 100% of what Podsy and Disk do, though. I think these things also go in some amount of trends. I mean, back back when I was in grad school, the joke was that PodC was all about consensus papers, and you couldn't get anything that wasn't a consensus paper into PodC, right? Principles Distributed Consensus, that was the acronym for the conference. And you know, there was people sort of were getting, there was some complaint about it at the time of why is that all we're doing? Consensus isn't so relevant these days. Why? Who cares about consensus? No one in the practical world cares about consensus, right? Why are we wasting our time with Byzantine agreement? Were the discussions that I remember. This is a few years back. I was a grad student at the time, so people who remember that time better, feel free to disagree or chime in. But I remember lots of criticism of PodC about being too focused on red team stuff then. There was this shift then to working on graph algorithms we've had over the last 5 or 10 years. And hey, that means it's a good time for us to shift to something else now as the topics we work on continue to evolve.
Hagit, do we have time for another question?
Yeah, one more question and maybe move to a different topic, like leave this rabbit hole.
Okay, leave it. So I just want to ask Guy Gorin to ask his question, if I may. Because I want to say something about this, but I don't hear him. So Guy asked. Yeah.
Just takes a second. I'm saying if there is such a divided people feel, then why not changing into 2 tracks?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this is why I wanted you to ask it. And I think it's been discussed. I'm sorry, I couldn't attend yesterday's business meeting, but it was discussed in various business meetings. And I think that our strength and our impact is also because of our word in English, the fact that we are united as a distributed computing community with all its flavors and colors and whatnot. I learned a lot from my work in the red area, and I still use many of these principles in my work. And one thing I was hoping to do for next PodC, but it's still at the level of, you know, just being inside my head, is having maybe 2 very short, not a talk about, you know, one of the areas, but maybe just, you know, pick a gem in that area and deliver it so that everyone can understand it technically, just to get a flavor of what the field is like. Many people, I think when the conferences are held on Zoom, I don't know if anyone checked the numbers, but I think there's more attendance in the sessions, but you can really see in the physical conferences that, you know, there's the sessions of different colors. And I think I would really like to avoid that. So it's a good question. It makes a lot of sense on some aspect, but I really think that that our strength is in, you know, having a community with some, you know, good joint fields of interest.
So Seth, I'll let you do the last have the last word before we move to the next.
I was just going to completely agree. I was just going to completely agree with that. I think there's a lot of work that crosses both boundaries. Amitabh asked a question about fault-tolerant graph algorithms, something that he and I have worked on a bit, and a whole bunch of other things. And moreover, I think that I'm hoping that the next generation of things we work on will address new sets of issues and new topics, and that we'll end up moving beyond this red-blue divide because of some new green topic that someone else comes up with. I didn't mean that literally, but perhaps. Anyways, so I completely agree with what Keren was saying here.
So I'm afraid, I'm really afraid actually. I'm sorry that we need to move on and wrap up this discussion and move to the start of the next session.